Good morning to you and welcome. Lovely to see you again today on a Sunday morning. And we're continuing our thinking through Luke's Gospel. We're in Luke chapter 9, verses 7 to 9, which might just be easy to glance over, really, because it's about Herod. It says, I'll read it to you, it's only 3 verses. Now Herod the Tetrarch heard all that was done, and he was perplexed, because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead, by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the old prophets had risen. Herod said, John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things? And he sought to see him. Interesting little passage. Of course, the other Gospels tell us about the beheading of John by Herod at the request of his stepdaughter, actually, Salome. But Luke doesn't tell us that detail except in passing here, really. We had that passage, that part about John sending messengers when he was in prison to Jesus. But we don't have the record in his Gospel about the death of John the Baptist, except here in a brief reference. This Herod is not the same Herod that was on the throne when Jesus was born. That was his father, Herod the Great. This is Herod Antipas, who was appointed by the Romans to rule over a quarter of the territory of the Jewish land, the area of Galilee. So he was Tetrarch, the Roman ruler of the area of Palestine where Jesus was ministering, and his disciples were ministering the northern part that contained the Sea of Galilee and Capernaum and Bethsaida and Nazareth, all that area. If you get a chance to look at a map, have a look at a map and see the area that he was ruler of. And again, I don't know if in your Bible it has it, but in my Bible it divides things up not only in chapters but into sort of paragraphs of subject matter. And so this is separated from the verses we looked at yesterday about the mission of the 12. And it feels like something different, but it starts with, now Herod the Tetrarch heard all that was done. And I think he had a finger on the pulse. He knew what was going on in the area that he was in control of and ruling. And he had people who told him what was happening everywhere. And news got back to him that not only was this person, Jesus, who came from Nazareth, a carpenter, was he going around himself preaching and teaching and healing people, but his disciples were doing the same thing. And it was spreading from village to village and further afield. And lots of things had happened, and he heard about everything. And he was perplexed. And there are a lot of people who hear what has happened. Perhaps second or third hand, they hear what is going on. They hear what God is doing. They hear about perhaps particular conferences or particularly ministers or churches that are thriving where others are not. And they wonder what's going on. There was speculation rife. And we know from the passage a little later in the same chapter, from verse 18 on, when Jesus himself picks up this thought that's going round, it's reached his ears, and he has a discussion with his disciples. What are people talking about? What are they saying about me? What have you heard people say? And they were talking about it. Some were saying that John had been raised from the dead, John the Baptist, which is a very strange thing, really, isn't it? Because when you think about the ministry of John the Baptist, he was a great preacher, but there's no record of him performing any miracles at all. None at all. If you think back to the record we have of John the Baptist, he was not a miracle worker. He was not one who you would say, well, I'll take my sick to John because he'll heal them, because there's no record that he did heal anybody. So that seems very strange that inference would be made. And then some said that it must be Elijah, the greatest prophet, Elijah. And yet Elijah didn't perform very many miracles. It was Elisha who performed lots of miracles. But Elijah was was greatly revered and greatly honoured, and still is, really, and rightly so, as a great prophet, or one of the other prophets. That's something that it couldn't be someone. It had to be somebody special. It couldn't just be a carpenter who was doing all of this. What was all this? And his disciples, who were fishermen and tax collectors and ordinary people, you know. And Herod is heard to say that he thought he'd got rid of the troublemaker John when he beheaded him. He thought he'd stopped all this nonsense going on in his territory. He'd beheaded John after all. But who on earth was this person? And he sought to see him. And that's fascinating. I don't know if he ever did, if Herod ever did see Jesus or go to listen to him at any point. I don't know. But it's an interesting thought that this very powerful man was curious. And we have incidents all through the New Testament of important people wanting to know more about Jesus because the rumours had reached them in their palaces of all these things that were going on by this man, and they wanted to see a miracle done. He may well have been in the crowd when 5,000 were fed, which is the next story. I don't know. I don't know if he was. There's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we could imagine. You know, if you ever read a storybook and then watch a film, they put in the film all sorts of things that never happened just to make the story more interesting. But wouldn't it be interesting to write a little story about Herod disguising himself as an ordinary person and sitting in the crowd and listening to Jesus as he taught? That's an interesting sideline of a thought. But there are a lot of people who think about Jesus and who are perplexed about Jesus. There are a lot of people whose curiosity is stirred. And many ask the question that greater scholars than I have ever asked, which is, if Jesus was such a great teacher, he must have been mad because he claimed to be God. And those who met him and listened to him, they knew he claimed to be God, which is why they tried to kill him many times in his lifetime, because he was blaspheming against the Jewish belief that God was one. And of course they didn't have an understanding of the Trinity as we have now. And they thought he was blaspheming, that it wasn't possible for God to be in human form. But Jesus kept saying it. And if he was mad about that, how could anyone believe anything else he said? Because he was mad. But if he wasn't mad, and what he said was true, and everything he said has to be taken notice of, then you have to stop being perplexed and make a decision about whether you're going to accept that he really is who he says he is, and that he has a claim on our lives. This was the big vexing question for Herod, the Tetrarch, Herod Antipas. And I don't know, there's no record that he ever came to any kind of faith. And there are many people who never make that transition between being curious about Jesus and becoming a disciple. I hope you've made that transition and that you're on the discipleship road along with me. Anyway, great thoughts for today, I hope, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.